we did a 2-day trip to North Wales and to Anglesey, and lots of things worked fine, others less so. So I made a list of the things that broke down or needed just. But I'll run through a few things that I found, and also some stuff I managed to get sorted beforehand. So first of all, the headlights, I think they could be brighter. I think they probably need a separate relay and wires straight from the fuse box rather than the original wiring that's still there. The expansion tank had a crack in the lid, so I've got another one of those. And the return pipe, I've got another one, it's just arrived, but I'm not sure whether we actually need it. So here's the engine cover off. Before we head off, James Spurgeon did the service and so on for us, and for me we then found that the water was losing itself from somewhere, and the question was, did the head gaskets need doing? Of course that's mega expensive. So I did a pressure test, or more accurately I did a CO2 test on the engine first. Take the radiator cover off, there's a thing that goes on the end of there, start the engine and just make sure it draws air through the chemicals, and it sees whether or not it changes colour to say that CO2 is making its way to the radiator, i.e. there's some leak at the head gasket.
So this is the kit I got. You can see in the centre there's a double chamber on the right in the centre, and you fill those two with the indicator fluid, and then the sphygmo manometer vent on the left. You pump that to draw air up through the chemicals, and that's what shows you that the colour's changing to detect the CO2. And if you have a look at the fluid, I looked at a few different sorts, and this is the one that seemed to be recommended by most people, and it worked fine, to be honest.
So once that was negative and the chances of the head gasket being blown were reduced, I then did a pressure test on this to about 17 psi, and what I found was that this blanking plate, you can see it's got a new gasket in there now, because it was dribbling water quite considerably out of there. This is the same inlet manifold that the engine gets used for a number of different purposes, and I assume that that's for a use elsewhere. So I bought replacement bolts and a gasket for it, and that stopped the leak there. Then I found that there's an exact sort of copy of that shape on the back where the exit, here's the entrance for warm water to the inlet manifold. Then there's at the back, essentially right at the back down there, there's another one of these, and it was dribbling water out of there too. So that was a hell of a lot more fiddle to get that off, and again the gasket had really perished to almost nothing. So I got another gasket, put that back on, pressure tested it, and all seemed well. However, when I checked the engine running, nothing was leaking out of the engine, but it basically spewed out of the overflow from the overflow bottle. Turned out that this radiator cap had perished inside, and so it was just blowing past as soon as it got warm. New radiator cap, and we've been around the whole of North Wales, and it's lost pretty much nothing. I also wondered whether the return pipe from the overflow, this one, had a split or something in it, so that when it was trying to suck water back out of the overflow bottle, it was losing its vacuum. despite getting another tube, actually I've looked at this one and it looks okay, and I've not had to add any water to the system. So thankfully that's it for in here. So as we were setting off, the connections on here just ran the sink and it leaked through there. Turned out that the Jubilee clips on the end of the pipe, as you tighten them up, had torn little holes in the pipe, so we end up having to put tape round the outside of the pipe to help it, PTFE tape on the inside to give it a good seal to bind to, and after that there was no leak. As I was putting the water tank in, the little angled piece here that had a connection from this either side just snapped off. It looked really weak, so I had to, because we were in a rush, just basically drill a hole bigger to put the whole pipe through. The pipe's slightly bigger than the one that was there before internally, so I had to put a Jubilee clip on, which obviously, although it's stainless steel, is looking like it's got a tad bit of rust on it. So we'll have to look to see about getting the same pipe that was on the other one, because it's fitted onto the immersion pump really well. The other thing was that the water pump itself would switch on and off and on and off. According to Whale, so the pump sits, well, you can't see it, maybe you can, pump sits up in there. According to Whale, they say, oh, there's dirt probably got into the diaphragm, which I was a bit miffed about because it's brand new. This was its first trip out. So essentially I bought another diaphragm bit for it, and the micro switch for the pressure switch, which is all behind there.
Actually, sadly, I discovered I was just really thick. The water tank, I hadn't let an air vent so that the pump would pump against the tank, creating a vacuum which would eventually overpower the pump, and then it would cut in, cut out. So I've obviously figured that out since then, and I put a different cover on the fill point of the tank whilst it's in its cupboard, so that there's air can get in, and that way solve the problem.
Other than that, water system worked fine, loo worked fine behind the door there. We didn't use the shower because I couldn't get the hot water to work, so I need to try and reset it, and obviously with the pump messing about, I couldn't prime the hot water system to get it working. But anyway, heater worked fine. We just used it one morning when it was a bit chilly when we woke up. But this was the major pain in the backside. When I put metal clips on this bottom heavy drawer, it was so strong on the magnet that Leanne couldn't open the drawer, so I had to reduce the magnet power, which meant the weight of this was enough to pull the drawer out, and then it caught the bottom of this drawer and actually started to break off the bottom over there. So I've got some external metal catches that just rotate around and will just trap the edge of the door. I'll probably put it on that side, and that will stop that ever happening again. However, I've got to fix the front of this drawer over there to begin with. The table, that worked really fine, that worked really well. So and the bed was reasonably comfortable, getting the air through front and back on the two skylights was really good, and the fridge worked a treat. The 200 watt solar was plenty enough, even with the lights, the fridge and everything. We had no hookup for well, at all, but we were away for a couple of days. Hook up there just to hang the tea towel and towel on. So just a little bit of fettling and then sort the hot water out. That seems to be the majority of what needs doing. I think the water pump is going to be the biggest pain because it's at the back of that cupboard, and I might have to take some of the trays and doors off to actually be able to reach to the back reasonably well. But other than that, the list has just got some niggly bits that we found out. The good bit was, going up and down the hills of Wales, it was perfectly fine. Now the horror story was of course the fuel consumption, which was about, I worked out at about 12 miles per gallon. But that was included going up and down the gorges and through the steep pass. But you know, such is life. The mirrors decided to spin on the post, and these, without the rubber blocks that I've actually just put in, the wind forcing on it just pushed it round once it had loosened up a bit, and this was actually as closed and tight as it could be. So there's the thread lock, the red blocks, and now it's not going anywhere. It was quite narrow, so we did catch the bar a couple of times on some hedgerows and things. It was really nice to be able to open the back door and let the breeze flow through. In fact, it was too windy on occasion doing that. It didn't get too hot. That means put some grease and oil down the hinges, although I've done it several times. Now because of the spare wheel, it can only come round so far, and it would be good if we could have some way of putting stays on the door so that the wind doesn't blow it backwards and forwards. And also obviously I don't really like leaving this one open too much because of the weight of the wheel on the hinge, but occasionally it would be good. So in terms of keeping us safe, carbon monoxide monitor, smoke alarm, and you can see just on the top, just there, is a gas alarm. Now the gas alarm originally was wired to when the heater was on, but actually you probably need to know whether there's gas leaked out before you turn the heater on. So the switch there that switches the gas circuit on, there's a wire that comes into there, so I've got it down there, under here, along and to the gas sensor, and that means that when the gas circuit goes live, it turns power to the gauge to see how full the tank is, the solenoid switch for the outside tank, and also the gas detector. And then you know if there's anything in the van before you hit to ignite anything. Actually, I forgot, there was one thing. Putty Speedo sort of wobbled like crazy. It would suddenly catch and drop up and down. So that's either a loose cable at the back of the gauge, or a loose connection on the gearing into the, I think it's the gearbox, but I'd need to check both ends. Obviously this end's a bit easier to get a hand on, and if it's not that, well, I'll have to route around the bottom end. I can't remember where it goes to. So we did a couple of days away in North Wales a while ago, found a load of problems, and one of them was the brakes, which on something this big, not such a good idea. So investigations started. So essentially the brake pedal got to the point where you have to push really hard to get things to stop. And it was getting pretty difficult to figure out what the hell it was that was causing it. With it being really difficult to get brake despite pressure, First thing I thought of was the servo, and it was pretty knackered. So this is one from 101 Parts. Essentially taking the master cylinder off without dismantling the whole thing and bringing it out was a bit fiddly, but it is doable. And these 4 bolts here, or is it 6, will enable you to loosen it to get access to the pin which is back here. There's a split pin that comes out and then it will undo, and the whole point was I didn't want to drain the whole brake system and then having to bleed it all, which worked out well up until the point that these, see, they've got Jubilee clips on now, but they didn't have before, and it slid off the end and basically emptied all the brake fluid out. So that meant I had to bleed it anyway. Actually, I looked to then bleed the brakes because I'd have to fill it up. This is one of the bleed nozzles that I took out, and this is the best one. But you can see even with this how the tip is corroded. The nut at the top is actually in pretty good order, but a lot of the other ones were just completely mangled. So I didn't want to take them out until I got some new ones. I ordered some new one of these, pretty easy to get hold of, and then once you can see it at the bottom there with a little black rubber nipple on that I bought separately. So the point was I then bled all 4, starting at the back. I took the wheels off first, and as part of that, this wheel, when I took it off, I took the hub off as well, and it was full of oil. I'd done that before on the series on one of the front brakes, and that meant that the end seal on the half shaft was gone. So basically James, who looked after the Land Rovers for me, came over and changed it, but found that it was this seal here that was blowing off in here and dumping into the drum, and that's when I learnt my first lesson. So we're onto the back now, and the lesson was from James is that you can see the pressure relieving vent that actually has a pipe on it that then runs up to keep it out of the way, and they can get really gunked up and sealed. So when the pressure builds up in the diff casing, instead of it venting out through there, it blows out through the weakest point, which in this instance was the right end seal. So when I took that out, it was completely blocked, and while I was at it, I did exactly the same thing to the one on the front axle, and you can see the tube going off up there to keep it out of the way for going through water. But that coming off, that was 3/4 of the way blocked. So once that was done, then I knew that there was nothing else that I could do about it. So I thought I'd been pretty smart, sorted it all out, and we went for a few days away in Yorkshire, and yes, it would stop, but if I absolutely stood on the brake pedal, it was safe enough because I'm just strong enough to press on the pedal, but it wasn't fun, and I had to take some care to keep away from people. So when we got back, in fact while I was away, I was just trying to figure out what the hell it was that was making life so difficult. And there were a couple of things which I've done since I've been back. First thing is, back here, when I took the old one out, there was sealant around here, which I put down to the fact that it was so falling apart that it was there was a leak inside and it was helping to stop it come out. But apparently the seals inside there are not brilliant. Now I have checked this and it looked actually pretty good, but just in case I've sealed that as well, obviously taking care to get none down the centre of the hole. It's just around the underside of that flange. And the second thing was that although I bled every single brake, starting the back, going to the front, pulled through loads of fluid, there was lots of crap in the lines, and when it went light again, I went through about 2 or 3 reservoirs full of brake fluid to try and pull it all through using a vacuum system. Essentially this compressor attaches onto here. This goes onto the, obviously no dirt on, onto the bleed nipple. Set it running, it creates a vacuum in here, and so it will draw it out. Now it's a pretty powerful vacuum, so actually you've got to be careful that you don't open the bleed nipple too far, because it will drag it in past down the threads, not just the bleed nipple at the tip. But either way, it's a good way of drawing through fluid. Rubbish goes in here. This is just our storage of the stuff I've pulled out and dodgy petrol and all sorts. But this worked really well. I use it on bikes, Land Rover, etc., and it makes life a hell of a lot easier. It makes bleeding the brakes a one-man job. But what I discovered was that not only are there bleed nipples on each of the 4 corners, there is actually one more place which, if you I'm trying to see this on the small screen and describe it to you. You can see right in the centre of the screen is a balancing valve, and on the front face is a black rubber cap, which is the new cap that I put on the additional bleed nozzle. So I bled it there, got some air out, and I've just been for a spin, and although it perhaps isn't quite as good as it was when I first got it, that's made a big difference. I can really bring it to a stop pretty promptly without too much hassle. It's a big vehicle though, so you do have to push firmly, but at least it gives me the confidence that I can actually then deal with this on a longer trip. And the other thing I hadn't realised was, I'm going to try and show you this now, the switch for the brake pedal or brake lights is there, and you can see that it goes away, and as it comes back off turns the switch off, and because of the arrangement of this and so on, it's very, very slightly different to what was in there before. I think I might have tried to shorten the brake pedal travel a little bit in an adjustment. That meant that, unbeknownst to me, the brake lights were on permanently until I've just adjusted it, which means they're off when you're obviously not braking, and come on when you press the pedal. So thanks to the 101 club site, the forums, which have been really helpful with this, and a few other bits from Landy's own, that's what drove me to change the solenoid, bleed the brakes starting at the back, then the front, bleed the switchover valve. Adjusting the discs is, the brake pads are fun, because you've got to have it just binding, just touching. You've got to adjust them as far out as you can without them actually dragging, because otherwise there's too much foot travel. First time I adjusted them, you had to sort of put them down and then put the pedal down again, which again happened on the Land Rover when one of the adjusters broke. So I knew what it was, and that is basically, it pushes the cylinder out, then pushes it out again on the drums. So imagine that it's exposed, and the 2 halves of the brake pads, and the caliper or the cylinder pushes them out, then pushes them out again. So they've got to be adjusted just to the edge, so they're not quite touching the inside of the drum, so that as soon as you press the pedal, they're in contact. And then of course balancing left and right is just as much fun. I mean, on the Landy it's fair enough, but this is, quite a bit of weight, so sticking it up on a jack or stand to do each wheel has been entertaining.